real mist archives.
The bodies of 9 hikers were found scattered across the mountain. Nearby, their shelter stood torn open from the inside. Footprints showed the group had left together, walking into sub-zero cold. Some were partially undressed. Others showed severe internal injuries. One body was missing eyes and tongue. Several had broken bones without external wounds. Later, traces of radiation were found on certain clothing. Limited, inconsistent, unexplained. What investigators recovered did not form a single answer, only a series of unresolved facts. 9 experienced hikers set out into the northern Ural Mountains in the winter of 1959. They were not reckless, inexperienced, or unprepared. They were trained, disciplined, and confident. Nothing about their journey suggested it would end in disaster. In early 1959, the northern Urals were among the most isolated regions of the Soviet Union. The terrain was harsh, sparsely populated, and unforgiving in winter. Temperatures regularly dropped far below freezing, and strong winds could transform open slopes into hostile environments within minutes. The group consisted of students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Each member had prior experience with long winter expeditions. They were accustomed to navigating snow-covered terrain, managing supplies, and making decisions under pressure. This was not an improvised trip. The route had been planned in advance, the equipment carefully selected, and the objectives clearly defined. Their goal was to complete a high-difficulty trek and return on schedule, as they had done before. For the first part of the journey, everything proceeded as expected. Then, the group failed to report back. At first, the delay did not cause immediate alarm. Weather conditions were unpredictable, and minor setbacks were common. But as days passed without communication, concern grew. Eventually, search teams were dispatched. What they found on the mountainside was not a single shocking discovery, but a collection of details that felt subtly wrong. The campsite was located on an exposed slope, exactly where the group had planned to stop. There were no signs that they had attempted to relocate to safer ground. The tent stood partially collapsed, pressed into the snow by wind and time. Inside, most of their belongings remained: shoes, coats, food, equipment. Everything required for survival in extreme cold was still there. This suggested a normal night setup. The group had not been preparing to flee. There was no indication of a planned evacuation. Then investigators noticed the tent itself. The fabric had been damaged from the inside. Long, deliberate slashes cut through the material. Not tears caused by wind or collapse, but openings made by human hands. The tent's entrance was still functional. At the time, investigators suggested panic, possibly triggered by a sudden natural event, something that forced the group to leave immediately without gathering their gear. On the surface, this explanation seemed plausible, but it raised an immediate problem. Experienced hikers do not abandon shelter, clothing, and equipment in sub-zero temperatures unless the danger inside the tent feels greater than the danger outside. What could create that perception? Footprints provided the next set of facts. Leading away from the campsite, investigators documented tracks descending toward a forested area below. The prints belonged to multiple individuals, moving together. Some were barefoot, others wore only socks. In those conditions, exposure could become fatal within minutes. What stood out was not just the lack of footwear, but the behavior implied by the tracks. They were relatively orderly. There were no signs of running, no evidence of a chaotic stampede. The group appeared to be walking. Officials proposed that the hikers believed the forest offered protection. Trees could reduce wind exposure, branches could be used for firewood. From a survival standpoint, the decision was not irrational, but the contradiction remained. If the threat was immediate and severe enough to justify leaving the tent, why move calmly? And if it was not, why leave behind the very equipment needed to survive the night. The first bodies were discovered near the edge of the forest. Several showed signs consistent with hypothermia. Nearby, investigators found the remains of a small fire. Broken branches on surrounding trees suggested attempts to climb, possibly to look for the others, or to break off dry wood. These details painted a picture of survival efforts under extreme conditions. But the condition of the bodies introduced new inconsistencies. Some were missing clothing, not torn away, but absent, and the missing garments later appeared on other members of the group. This redistribution suggested conscious decisions made after the group had already split. The official explanation pointed to a known phenomenon: paradoxical undressing. In advanced stages of hypothermia, victims can experience a false sensation of warmth, leading them to remove clothing. This explanation accounted for part of the evidence, but not all of it. Why did this behavior affect only some members? Why were clothes shared in a way that suggested planning rather than confusion? Once again, the pieces almost fit. Months later, additional bodies were discovered deeper in the terrain. They were located in a ravine, buried beneath layers of snow. These individuals had attempted to build a more substantial shelter using branches and packed snow. Their actions suggested adaptation, not panic. The injuries they sustained, however, were severe. Some suffered fractured ribs. Others had skull damage. The force required to cause such trauma was comparable to that of a high-impact accident. Yet there were few external wounds, no clear signs of a struggle, no widespread disturbance in the surrounding terrain. Investigators concluded that a powerful natural force could be responsible: a fall into the ravine, or pressure from heavy snow. These explanations were technically possible, but they introduced another question. What kind of force could cause such injuries without leaving more obvious traces? For decades, the Dyatlov Pass case remained officially closed. Yet over the years, a wide range of explanations has been proposed. Some focused on natural forces: avalanche, extreme winds, sudden environmental conditions capable of triggering panic without warning. Others explored physiological and psychological factors: hypothermia, disorientation, stress responses under prolonged exposure and exhaustion. There were also suggestions of external involvement: military testing, classified activity in the region, accidental encounters with forces the group did not understand. One detail, in particular, continued to attract attention. Several clothing items were later found to contain traces of radiation. The levels were inconsistent, limited to specific garments, and not high enough to explain the deaths. Investigators concluded that, while unusual, the radiation did not provide a direct cause. Instead, it became another fragment in a case already defined by fragmentation. Over time, a quieter interpretation began to take hold. Rather than a single catastrophic event, the evidence suggested a sequence of decisions. Each choice made sense in isolation: leaving the tent, seeking shelter, sharing clothing, moving downslope. None of these decisions was inherently fatal, but together they reduced the group's margin for survival. Exposure increased. Energy declined. Options narrowed. The final outcome did not come from one mistake or one hidden force. It emerged from accumulation. That is why the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to resist a single explanation. Not because nothing fits, but because too many explanations almost do.